Hey, folks, how's it going? Let me know if you can hear and see me well and all that good shit. I'm going to get into how big ag, big pesticide, big drink this and get cancer, how all of them are working together to stop sustainable farming, delay the increase in sustainable farming. I'm going to get into those revelations. I'm going to get into the movement to stop Atlanta's Cop City and the police there murdering someone. I know I mentioned it the other day, but I'm going to get into that a little more of the details. I'm also going to reveal to you which one of my family members has been nominated for an Oscar. Not fucking kidding. It's totally not political or it's just something interesting. Well, I want to tell you one of my family members is nominated for an Oscar, so I'm gonna tell you that. But more importantly, I'm gonna get into how we're sending tanks to Ukraine. Lots of stuff. If we have the time, I'm going to talk about one of the tricks they're using to make sure more Americans, millions of more Americans, don't get health care. New tricks. Newish tricks in a way. You'll see what I'm saying in a minute. I'm going to get to all that and more. So that's all coming up. But let's start at the beginning. The beginning is always a good place to start. I just find it just feels right. So DeSmog, which is a pretty damn good outlet, and they've been doing this for years. Well over a decade, DeSmog has been doing well-researched information and writing on the climate, on destruction of our environment, on pollution by big corporate entities. This is the type of shit you will not get from your mainstream media because they're all funded by the big corporate entities. And Big Ag is one of the most destructive, villainous entities on our earth, on our planet. And it not only does it get zero coverage on your mainstream media for obvious reasons, it barely gets any coverage from independent media. And yet the stuff we put in our face hole is like one of the most important things in our lives. And I'm not talking sexually. I meant food-wise. I'm not talking whatever kind of tooth implements you have in there from your orthodontist. I'm talking about food. And you would think that independent media, which does an okay job of covering big oil, going after fossil fuels, right? That has now become fairly normal to do that stuff. But Big Ag just gets ignored. And it is one of the biggest players in how our world is being destroyed. Anyway, this article is called Sowing Doubt, How Big Ag is Delaying Sustainable Farming in Europe. In the spring of 2020, the European Union announced an ambitious plan to overhaul farming practices in fields and valleys across the continent. Named Farm to Fork, it calls for less fertilizer and pesticide use and more organic production. Now, without getting into any more details, just hearing that, less pesticide, does that not sound like a good thing? Like these pesticides, what the shit that Monsanto and the others, now Monsanto is owned by Bayer now, a German company, even though Monsanto is an American company. What the stuff they tell us is okay for us to eat, the herbicides and pesticides that they say is okay for us. And now we learned this several years ago, that Roundup, the largest herbicide, not pesticide, the largest herbicide in the world, Roundup, is cancerous, and that's now been proven, and yet it's on all of our foods. Like all of the stuff we stick in the face hole has this cancerous agent on it, and we just keep acting like that's fine. Just keep going with that. So just without getting deeper into this, if you hear less pesticide, anything that it creates less use of pesticides and herbicides should be a good thing. And yet they have succeeded with propaganda that makes people think this is something to be avoided. Named Farm to Fork calls for less fertilizer and pesticide use. Veteran and fertilizers, by the way, even though many of them may not harm humans, they are harming our world in that the fertilizers then wash into the oceans, create ocean dead zones, create the red tide in Florida that killed all the fish and made the beaches. You couldn't even go on the beaches, not just because you could get sick or die from drinking the water, but also because just the smell of rotting shit. I mean, honestly, Florida, it should smell that way because that would be like a representation of what Florida is. I'm sorry to all of you who live in Florida, but you've got to realize if you're watching this, then you're the exception to people that live in Florida. You are not. You don't need to defend Florida. You can be there and be like, you're cool, but Florida is not. Uh, but anyway, the red tide was created by fertilizers and shit flowing from the farms from the big ag farms into the ocean, and killing all the fish, etc. Veteran sustainable food and farming experts welcome the strategy as one that just might have a genuine shot at transforming the agriculture sector and result in better public health, contribute to ending the vertiginous decline of biodiversity. I honestly have no idea what that word means, but I'm assuming it has something to do with vertical. But vertiginous decline of biodiversity and lower greenhouse gas pollution. The response from Europe's powerful industrial agriculture sector, just like the U.S. agriculture sector is incredibly powerful, was swift and unequivocal. Farm to fork will result in disaster. Lower yields, higher food prices, unviable incomes for farmers are among the outcomes predicted by an army of Brussels lobbyists who are employed by the agrochemical industry and its allies in the intensive farming sector. But just one of the things I want to address before we even get into the rest is unviable incomes for farmers. Well, if we need to switch to a different way of setting up our society, no matter what it is, if it's less pesticide, if it's less herbicide, if it's any of those things, if we have to switch the way our society is, such as a switch away from fossil fuels, or a switch away from harmful mining, or a switch away from hydrofracking, there's a million things we need to switch away from, and people go, well, wait a second, that will harm workers. That will harm the people that do the mining. They won't get an income anymore. If you want to switch away from these things, we could fucking subsidize the people that would get so-called harmed from the change. So if farmers say, listen, you make me use less pesticide, then I'm not going to be able to grow as much. I'm not going to be able to feed my family. This upsets me. Well, then the government or the society or whatever, the group of people that is doing this, could say, I got an idea. Let's make it so that the farmers are subsidized, are encouraged to switch to less fossil fuels, less pesticide, less herbicide, whatever it is. So the fact that workers will get harmed by this is not a reason to just go ahead and destroy our planet, or go ahead and keep using fossil fuels and heating up the entire globe. That's not a reason to do that. That's a reason to subsidize the switch away. We subsidize big oil to the tune of trillions of dollars globally every year. Trillions is poured into big oil as they pour big oil on us. Trillions is poured into big oil to make sure they can keep being heavily profitable, making sure they can keep paying their CEO 1,000 times more than their average worker. So if we can find the money to subsidize big oil to exist and pollute and kill us, don't you think you could have a shift and subsidize workers away from this system? So the idea that this would harm farmers, yeah, if you don't do it right, if you don't fucking fix the system so that it doesn't harm farmers, come up with something where it doesn't harm farmers. It's easy to do if you actually want this transition to happen. All right, so far they've already spent 20 million euros on the lobbying efforts to sink this change in Europe away from heavy pesticide use, away from heavy toxic fertilizer use, away from a type of farming that will continue to destroy the viability of our systems, the viability of the soil, the viability of the biodiversity to sustain and prop up such a system. We need to move away from that. And yet you have millions, if not billions, being spent on various forms of lobbying to convince people that no, we cannot change. We need to continue going down the path that will destroy all of humanity. That is the only way. I mean, this reminds me of so many things. It's like with big pharma, with big war contractors, weapons contractors. No, the only way is to go towards nuclear Armageddon. That is the only and best way for us to continue. Really? Is it? You think so? All right. So this DeSmog article gets into, well, I'll give you a little more before I talk about that. Europe is poised to enact laws that would not only recognize the harms of chemical-intensive agriculture, but also to ensure that synthetic pesticide and fertilizer use is significantly reduced. The targets are steep: to cut pesticides by 50% and fertilizers by 20% by 2030. Now, they also mentioned some of the harm that's being done by these things, by the pesticide use and the fertilizer use. They say 1 in 10 bee and butterfly species are endangered in Europe, and chemical pesticides are a major driver. And, they may not have on hand the percentage of bees and other pollinators that have been killed over the past 40 years, but I know it's immense. I know that the number of pollinators is way down. The number of bugs in general is way down. And I don't know if I'm saying something real complicated here, but we kind of need bugs. I know it's nice to not have to like swat something away from your face. But the thing is, other animals and plants survive because of bugs, pollinators, and eating the bugs that eat the plants and all those types of things. And so you kill all the bugs, you kill all the humans. I know, it's very complicated. It takes like a fucking math degree to even begin to figure out what that sentence means. But if we kill all the bugs, we're flyingly fucked. Pun intended. So maybe we should not want to kill all the bugs. But instead, we are killing them all. And perhaps we should do something to address this, but instead you get these bullshit lobbying points from Big Ag saying, no, the farmer might be hurt and therefore we must kill ourselves. DeSmog has identified the key arguments that big agriculture is using. So they basically went through each of the talking points coming from various big ag companies. Big ag includes obviously like torture farming, the million cows in the cage that they can't turn around in type of thing. But it also includes things like chemical pesticides, Monsanto, all that shit. So big ag encompasses a big group of petrochemicals, a big group of farm to fork process. Which I did a extensive video for Most Censored News on Cargill, which is the largest in America. It's the largest owner of the farm to fork process. They own a million little different pieces of it so that they can jack up prices along the entire production, the entire line. And you end up paying a lot more for various things. But then again, we also subsidize a lot of these things. That's how you can get a hamburger at McDonald's for, I don't know what it is now, $2. I don't eat McDonald's, but that's how you can get a hamburger at McDonald's for $2. But if you were to buy a, head of broccoli in the natural food store, it's $7. How much longer did that hamburger and how much more resources that hamburger take to create than the broccoli? The broccoli was one growing cycle. The cow lived for who knows how long. Tens of thousands of gallons of water pumped into it, all kinds of antibiotics they pump it full of, and obviously it's food and all that shit. And somehow $2. Someone says nothing at $2 is nothing at McDonald's is $2 anymore. One guy says a McDonald's hamburger is $6. All right, that's it. I'm Googling it. I am going by. I went $1 up from the price I know it was when I actually ate a hamburger, which I was 21 years old roughly when I probably stopped eating McDonald's. But a McDonald's hamburger is $2.49, folks. So for those of you who were trying to correct me and trying to mic drop on me, this Google search says that a McDonald's hamburger is $2.49. A cheeseburger is $2.79. So unless the Google search is fucking 10 years old, then you guys are lying to make me look dumb, which I appreciate. I appreciate the effort to lie in the chat to try and make me look dumb. But, all right. Anyway, fossil fuel industries has bought itself half a century. I love that. I highlighted that just because I like the expression, because it's totally what they did. The fossil fuel industry has bought itself half a century. For half a century, the earliest proof that Exxon and the others, the American Petroleum Institute, knew that climate change was happening and was going to happen is 1959. That's the earliest that we have public documentation that they knew. At least some of their scientists knew. Now, by the 60s and 70s, they were doing much internal research, and they could even predict the amount of degrees that the Earth would be heating up, and they were rather close to what has happened in their predictions. By the 90s, in late 80s, oil companies Shell Oil created a video warning everybody that climate change was coming, and then they decided to shelve the video and never put it out. You can still go watch it on YouTube, though, and that was 1991. So they've bought themselves half a century, although really they bought themselves more than that. If you talk about 1959, we're talking 65 years that they have bought themselves of us doing nothing and allowing fossil fuels to destroy our planet. All right, so here are the big ag companies. I do feel like I should name them because you should know who these shitheads are. BASF, Bayer, Syngenta, Corteva Agriscience, Yara International, Eurochem Group, CropLife Europe, Fertilizers Europe, Euroseeds, the European Chemical Industry Council, Copa-Cogeca, Fédération Nationale des Syndicats d'Exploitants Agricoles. I'm sure I nailed that. I think I combined a French pronunciation with a Spanish pronunciation towards the end of it. And the Agri-Food Chain Coalition and the European Carbon and Farming Coalition. So there's the list. And they went through and actually nailed down what type of propaganda each of these places is using. And many of them are using the same propaganda. So here are some of what they're using. Well, actually, let me go down here because each one of these is listed below. Arbitrary targets are not the solution. So that's one thing to say, which is just meant to be like, oh, there should be no targets. We should have no aims on creating a sustainable and organic farming experience that is not destructive to our world. We need to have no targets. Targets are not the answer. So that's one of the things they do. Someone says I don't see Bill Gates on there. Well, he's not a corporation. However, he is a part of this. But I will say that although Bill Gates is the number one or number two farming landowner in America, that's only if you count by individual. He owns a tiny percentage of what like Cargill or these other corporations own. I'm not saying don't go hard at Bill Gates, fucking attack the asshole plenty, but not to mention for his Jeffrey Epstein connections. But anyone who tells you Bill Gates owns the most farmland in America, they're being a little disingenuous. Bill Gates owns the most as for an individual. He does not own the most for these corporations and companies that own massive amounts of U.S. farmland. So they say arbitrary targets are not a solution, but experts say that creating a legally binding framework for Europe is crucial. I mean, that's just common sense. These companies will never abide by anything that's not legally binding. Capitalism is a structure where the company will go towards profit and will destroy, sometimes to the level of murdering environmental activists. As they actually, this is not environmental activists, but a different kind of activist. No, it's all right. What am I saying? It is an environmental activist. They just murdered in Atlanta, protecting the forests against Cobb City. I was thinking it was just an anti-police activist, but no, it's an environmental activist. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But they will go towards profit no matter what. So if there's not legally binding structure to hold them to account of less pesticide, for example, then they will never do any of the things. Now, of course, the idea of our government, which it is not at all, but the idea initially, I guess, well, I don't mean that our founding fathers were white, male, slave-owning jackasses, but they were also in many ways revolutionaries. But and some of them were not slave-owning. However, the idea of a government, I think that most people would promote or be a fan of, is that is there to keep these corporations to cause them to hold them to account. Sorry, I was about to say to cause them to account. To hold them to account. Now, of course, we don't do that at all in the United States, in most cases in Europe either. But we don't do that because they own the government. So the government doesn't hold them to account. The government owns them. They own the government and they tell the government what to do. So, number 2 on the propaganda line, reforms will jeopardize food production. According to pesticide firm Syngenta, targets would endanger food security, while the Copa-Cogeca representative has warned of the risk of green reforms at a time of volatile food prices that risked political unrest and even a refugee crisis. That's the other thing, is they say this is going to cause food prices to go up. And you're like, well, first of all, it doesn't have to. The government can subsidize whatever the fuck they want. By the way, and this stat is 10 years old, so I don't know what it is today. Anyone who's about to lie to me about fucking what I'm about to say, tell me I got it wrong. But the stat from 10 years ago was that the average cow in Europe was subsidized to the tune of $2, which is more than 50% of humanity makes in a day. The cows in Europe make more than 50% of humanity every day. It's fucking insane. But you can subsidize whatever the fuck you want. So the idea that prices will go up, well, only if you want them to let them go up, and you, it's a garbage talking point. And besides, you know what? The prices should go up if it means creating a better world. Like, it's very complicated, but we live in a heavily consumerist society where we're throwing out 40% of all food. 40% of all food gets thrown out in the United States. And yet then we go, well, why does it cost so much? Well, maybe because we're throwing out 40% of it. There's a lot of other details of why food, does or not cost too much, but which I should move along if I ever want to get through this article. The message that the green transition will come at an unacceptable social cost echoes a story often heard from the fossil fuel lobby. Experts say that this narrative is misleading on multiple fronts. The impact of the targets will depend on how they are implemented, scientists explain. Oh, yeah, we needed a scientist to explain that. How tough it is depends on how you do it. Oh, really? Can we get a guy with a bow tie on to explain that? Is there a guy with glasses who can tell us that how things go depends on how you do them? Could you get someone smarter? Is there someone who's authored a book who could explain that how tough things are? It depends on how you're doing the things. Okay, good. According to the United Nations, farmers already grow more than needed to feed the world's populations. Yeah, again, we throw away 40% of all food. I don't know what the number is in Europe, but I'm sure it's close to 40%. 40% of all food in the United States gets thrown out. Much of it gets thrown out because of things like in grocery stores. Do you ever go into a grocery store and they have a display of the fruits and veggies and it's like 3 oranges sitting out? No. They've got to have 1,000 oranges, right? It's got to be a cornucopia of corn. Pun intended. It's got to be a fucking deluge of fruit because that makes you more likely to buy it. You're more likely to grab the thing that is in a giant pile of glistening oranges or apples or bananas. You're more likely to go, that's what I want. Whereas if you saw a thing of 5 bananas sitting on a shelf alone, you'd go, it looks kind of dirty. I don't know what's going on with that 5 bananas. I don't know. Where did they pick those up at a yard sale? Sitting on a shelf alone. No, so they need bundles of this shit everywhere. And what happens to most of it? Most of it's thrown out. Now, it's also thrown out because it's ugly, right? Ugly fruit. I've done segments on this before. Ugly fruit and vegetables get thrown out because people don't want to buy ugly fruits and vegetables. You have a potato with a thing sticking off of it. Nobody wants that. You have a pepper that looks like a dildo. Nobody wants that either. People do not want ugly fruit. And so we throw it out. It's amazing how much food we throw out. Now, of course, most of the food we throw out is because we cook it and throw it out. Don't serve it to don't serve enough. We put it on the plate and then we decide I didn't want to eat that. So there's a million reasons. And I'm not saying I'm exempt from this. I certainly sometimes put things on my plate and don't eat them. But I have another family member, I won't say who believes that you're only actually serving your guests correctly if you have way more food than they could possibly eat. Like that is the way to correctly serve guests. So you have family over and you create just heaping bowls of stuff that they could never finish in a million years. And that's the correct way to serve guests. And, most of it gets thrown away. So, but of course, most food waste is not about personal choice. Like with most of these things, we should not shrink them down. I'm not saying you can't make better personal choices. I, for example, don't eat meat. It's a personal choice to against our, torture ag industry. But we have to talk about this in a way that is beyond the personal choice. Because if these corporations make it all about the personal choice, then they stop the criticisms of them. They stop you coming after the actual ruling class, the actual elite that make these decisions. And that's where the greatest waste is. That's where the greatest destruction is. That's where the use of all these pesticide chemicals is. Most of it is not on us individually. And so I support personal choices. I think people should make them, but don't look at that as your crusade. It shouldn't be like, another good example of a personal choice is I do my best to avoid using plastic bags, right? I say no to the plastic bag at the store, and when they want to give you all the plastic lids, I try and, as much as possible, I try and not take the plastic lids. But I don't sit here doing long videos on how you shouldn't use the plastic bags. And you should. If fucking don't. But if they make it about our individual choices, then we are missing the larger point, which is that we live in a system where we use hundreds of thousands of plastic bags globally every minute. Hundreds of thousands. Apparently, it's enough to cover France in plastic every day. It is unbelievable. And that is systemic. And we need to criticize the system. Because if we make it about us individually, then we've already lost the war. You may have won a tiny, tiny battle. You know, it's like putting a splinter in the boot of a guy on the other side when you're in war. When you're at war and you successfully get a splinter in the boot or attack in the boot of the guy on the other side, and you know that he's marching slower, his foot hurts, he's like, oh, what the fuck is in my boot? And maybe it'll get infected and it'll be really awful. And it's just really annoying, that guy. But I wouldn't say you won the war. I'm not going to say don't put a tack in his boot. I'm not going to say don't put a nail in his boot. Maybe it helps a little, but that's not really the issue at hand. Did that make sense? Hope so. This article is taking longer than I thought, but I think it's worth it. I think we're doing important work here. They say the EU targets ignore science. It's a familiar tactic of big oil, which has poured millions into funding independent scientific and economic studies, including paying economists to estimate the cost of climate policies. They're basically saying that big ag is doing the exact same thing that big oil does, except in this case, it's in Europe related to pesticides and fertilizer use. They're paying for their own studies, which are done by scientists that are funded by them, and they then go, look at that study. It says we should use all of the pesticide. Look, this guy, the scientist, just did a study, and it says we should drink pesticide for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Are you paying him? Oh, we are paying him a shit ton. We actually just gave his son braces. But that's not a real study. You can't be paying the goddamn scientists and also count it as a legit study. Again, the research doesn't account for the cost of inaction. Of course, none of these things account for the cost of inaction, right? Same with fossil fuels. If you account for inaction, well, then it's the death of the human species. So I think that someone should talk about it. Like, that should be counted in the study. But no. We'll just say miners are going to make less money mining coal. Well, what's the cost of continuing to use coal? We don't want to talk about that. That's not on the table to discuss. Number 4, reforms will make Europe dependent on imports. When it comes to imports, according to research done by Bliggity Blue, the EU is already a net importer of calories. However, the 2021 study found that if greener farming practices were combined with measures such as dietary changes and slashing food waste, Europe could transform to a net calorie exporter. There's so much about our diet. So, I like to talk about the different layers of reality. The layer of reality that you will not get from mainstream media, but even from independent media, and maybe even from this DeSmog article, is that there's so much about our diet that is impacted by a culture that is based on capitalist, consumerist tendencies. Much of what we're told to eat, much of what ends up on our plate has been so heavily influenced by capitalism. And when I say that, by the idea of profit over all else, and by the powerful corporations that exist, that we don't even realize that we may do things on a daily basis. I mean, the food pyramid was designed to support important American industries like dairy and like big ag, not to create a sustainable system, not to create a system that will be livable for our children and our grandchildren. That was not the aim. The aim was, how can we make sure people are eating and drinking enough of the industries that support our economy? There's no reason that humans should be drinking cow mucus in their 40s. Maybe there's some argument. I don't know. People can debate it out in the chat, but maybe there's some argument for why our kids could have some milk. But you get to a certain age, there's no reason we should keep having cow mucus in everything. And I know scientifically it's not cow mucus. It just sounds funny. But we do it, and we do it in a crazy amount because of it's incredibly important industry in our economy, and because of the power of big ag. And there's no reason we should be eating the amount of meat we eat, even if you eat meat. I think that at this point in human evolution, there's plenty of reasons not to eat meat at all. But even if you eat meat, and I actually, know some people with different blood types than me and in different situations who it seems need some meat, a small amount, but I think most do not. And yet the reason we eat meat, every meal has loads of meat. Whereas if you go back evolutionarily, like hunter-gatherer times, which was the vast majority, 95% of our existence on this planet, they weren't getting meat every day. Yes, they definitely had meat, and they were excited to have meat, and meat was important in our brain development. But meat at every meal was not a thing. Like most of the meals were like berries and twigs and shit. And yes, occasionally you were like, oh my God, I got some meat. But anyway, so we now have meat in our fucking cereal and shit. And why is that? Well, it's our capitalist system. People make a lot of money from delivering that meat to our plate. I see Alfred in the comment section is surprised that the food pyramid wasn't designed for the benefit of our health. No, it was not. And I actually, for those of you who don't know, I have a podcast called Government Secrets, where we go over various secrets of history, secrets of the U.S. government. And one of the ones I've wanted to do for a while now is the origins of the food pyramid, which is it's not based on health. And I don't remember all the details, so I don't want to give them right now and get them wrong. But the food pyramid is not based on health. It's based on a lot of other things, one of them being the companies that the U.S. wanted to continue to support, because the U.S. wanted to have a vibrant economy, and these were the companies and the industries that were involved in that. So, but anyway, I'll do the research, and I'll come back one day with a larger explanation of the food pyramid. If anybody's got a good article on the origins of the food pyramid that explains where it actually came from, then feel free to post in the comments thread. All right. Anyway, I need to wrap up this topic and tell you which one of my family members is nominated for an Oscar, and so many more other topics. But I'll just wrap up with this. And if I can, why won't this? Damn it. I'm having a problem with the website I wanted to show you right there. Let's see if it refreshes. But anyway, if it doesn't refresh, I can just tell you about it. But there's a great chart in DeSmog. Oh, there it is. Okay. So now I can show it to you. Showing the influence of these companies and how they own other companies. And they are providing the talking points for this propaganda to stop these changes to food policy in Europe. And here's this excellent chart where you put the cursor on one of them. So Eurochem, you put the cursor and you see who they own and who they're what talking points they're putting forward. Yara, Syngenta, Bayer, BASF, and Corteva. and it shows which talking points they're putting forward, and it's an excellent chart. But and one person would like you to know that the food pyramid was built by aliens. How could that not be true? All right, let's move on. So there you go. In conclusion, fight against the propaganda. And one last note is, I'm amazed the people that claim to be independent journalists who don't look at where for certain topics, don't look at where the money's coming from, where the influence is coming from. So they'll repeat the bullshit by those exact companies, and they won't go, where did these talking points come from? Oh, they came from big ag, big chemical, they came from shitheads like Syngenta and Monsanto. And it's like, you call yourself a independent journalist, a outside the mainstream journalist, and yet you're repeating the bullshit coming from big ag. Like, isn't step one to not give out the talking points of big ag and big oil? And like, it's just, to me, it's nonsensical. It's like, if you want to stand for something that is outside the mainstream media, then step one is look at where the money's coming from, where to give those talking points. If it's coming from big ag and big chem and big pharma, then you're repeating the wrong shit, to put it simply. All right. I'll keep this one short because it's not political, and it's not news in the traditional sense, because it's about the Oscars, which, in a larger sense, and this is one of the ways where I'll be hypocritical. And I've told you before, I have hypocritical stances. As long as it's lightly hypocritical. For example, I am opposed to children farming rare earth metals out of Africa, being lowered into the center of the earth on a rope made out of tied together used underwear, in order for us to have our computers and our smartphones. I am violently opposed to that. I also have a laptop and a smartphone, and the laptop is what you're seeing right now that is filming me. So it's like, to live in this society, in some ways, you have to be lightly hypocritical. Now, that is far less hypocritical than me sitting here and saying anyone who owns a laptop is a piece of shit, and I'm coming to you from a laptop. That is aggressive hypocrisy, and I would never do that. Anyway, so this is lightly hypocritical in the sense that I certainly, and I've said this before, understand that the Oscars and the Golden Globes and all of these things are a largely rich industry getting together and patting each other on the back and saying, we're celebrities, hurrah! I can understand that, and I can also be like, my brother's nominated for an Oscar. Fucking cool is that? So my brother is nominated for an Oscar for Best Animated Film, and I'm going to play for you. The film is called Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, and it's a lovely animated film. It honestly is. If you have kids or something and you want something that's not too heavy and is enjoyable for the whole family, and it has a lot of laughs for adults as well, then fucking show them this movie. It's so much better than all the other animated garbage that's out there. So anyway, I'm going to show you so it's called Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. It's still in theaters. I think some theaters, but it mainly is past its theater run. But it'll be probably on a streaming service one day, and I hear you can watch it on like airline flights and stuff. So there's places to watch it if you'd like to. But I'm going to play the not acceptance speech, but the reaction to being nominated for Oscar for Best Animated Film. And this is the reaction from Marcel. Marcel is a shell with shoes on, as per the name of the movie. So if you've never seen Marcel, then you may be very confused. Oh, and my brother's actually in the movie, by the way. He wrote, directed, and is in and co-stars in the movie. His part in the movie is rather small, but he's in the movie. So I'm going to show to you Marcel reacting to getting nominated for an Oscar. Let's see. Hopefully you can hear the sound.
What am I even supposed to say? I guess this is one of those moments that you call a stunner? Is this what you call a stunner? Wow, it really is an honor just to be nominated. I'm a little bit nervous about what maybe I should wear to this kind of thing. I look pretty weird in a bow tie just because it sort of accentuates that I don't have a neck, or maybe I am only a neck. And I don't really like to think of myself in those terms, so maybe I'll just put like a shiny glitter on my head or some sort of sash or something like that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'd just like to thank everybody and just to say congrats to all the other nominees. And now I feel a bit shy, so I'm just gonna conclude. Thank you for this prestigious honor, and Viva la cinema.
There you go, folks. Marcel the Shell with Shoes on, reacting to his Oscar nod. So yes, my brother's film is up for Best Animated Film, and it also was up for Best Animated Film at the Golden Globes, but it lost. So fuck that guy, Guillermo del Toro, with your Pinocchio bullshit. God damn it. But anyway, we'll see if he wins. He's not supposed to win. Guillermo del Toro is supposed to win still, but who knows? Anyway, moving on. I want to talk about the efforts to stop Atlanta's Cop City. This is, I talked about it a bit the other day. The movement to stop Atlanta's Cop City calls for support after police kill a forest offender. Literally, they murdered this guy in cold blood. I mean, this is about as fascistic and horrific as you can get. This is cops, heavily armed cops, going in and murdering a forest offender. And yes, in a moment, this will just be at rumble.com/Lee Camp. I'm sorry for the delay on that, but thanks to those of you who reminded me of that. But the movement to stop Atlanta's Cop City is getting bigger and bigger. I mean, unfortunately, it comes on the heels of this really assassination of a forest offender, but at least 19 Defend the Atlanta Forest and Stop Cop City activists occupying Weelaunee People's Park in Atlanta, Georgia, were arrested during a police raid on January 18th. Though police have claimed that they were conducting a regular clearing operation, clearing of human beings, the activists stated that it was, in fact, a heavily armed raid. Dozens of DeKalb police, Atlanta police, and Georgia State Police destroyed the forest around the Tree Defenders camp, cut down trees and tree houses in attempts to remove protesters, and used tear gas and rubber bullets to extract the forest offenders. Activists were charged with domestic terrorism and criminal trespass. They're charged with domestic terrorism for standing up against it's called Cop City because they're literally building a fake city for cops to train and for movies and TV to film. So that's what will go on there, destroying 100 acres of forest in Atlanta in order to allow cops to run around with their guns and play cop. I mean, This is the, like, there's so many, this is like an analogy for shitty. To take a brutal fascistic police force, cut down trees, and put a fake city where they can run around pretending to be brutal fascistic police shitheads, so that they can then go out in the real world and do it for real. And they charge these protesters with terrorism, which means they can spend years, they're facing years in prison. And now they have actually murdered one. They have actually assassinated one. It's just a level of horrific. One indigenous land defender named Manuel Turan has also known as Tortuguita, was shot and killed by police during a raid of the park. Turan was a trained medic who ran a mutual aid group, was a member of Tallahassee's Food Not Bombs, and organized disaster relief efforts for low-income families in Florida whose homes have been damaged by hurricanes. I mean, this guy sounds like everything you ever want in a human being. He's a fucking forest defender, a medic, a mutual aid organizer, and involved in disaster relief. I mean, if you were to say to me, like, I'm trying to create a human being who does nothing but good, that sounds like what this guy is. Forest defenders have occupied the Weelaunee, also called South River Forest, since June 2022 after the $90 million police training facility project, dubbed Cobb City, moved forward despite community opposition at city council meetings and community engagement sessions such as workshops, potlucks, and letter writing gatherings. Cobb City would entail the destruction of 100 acres of forest to build the largest police training facility of its kind in the state. If every U.S. state was a country, it would have the fourth largest rate of incarceration in the world. Georgia would. If every U.S. state were a country, Georgia would have the fourth highest rate per capita of incarceration in the world, meaning Georgia, the state, is the fourth highest rate of incarceration country in the world. Let that sit with you. Sit with that for a minute. Here is a photo of Manuel Turan. I mean, it's just horrific that they ran into this encampment to kill this guy. It's disgusting. And not surprising when you have militarized police like that in many ways. Not surprising. All right, I'm going to go. I'm going to continue on this topic, but I also have other topics coming up, such as the shipping of tanks to Ukraine at rumble.com/LeeCamp. That's rumble.com/Lee. It's free to go there. So, and watch. So I'm not saying to get the next information, you have to pay. Rumble.com/LeeCamp. And when you get there, please click follow. It's also free to do that. All right. I will see you there. And if you're already watching at rumble.com/LeeCamp, nothing will change. This stream will